Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Sable International UK Citizenship Podcast. My name is Tallulah and I'm here with Michelle Patel and Alexandra Varga to answer your questions about the EU settlement scheme. Alex is an immigration advisor registered with the UK OISC, and she has been working closely with clients and the Home Office in preparing and submitting EUSS applications. So she's the woman in the know. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alex.
Well, thank you for having me. These are very important issues to talk of at this time.
Yes, we've had quite a few questions coming through. So I think to start, can you give us a quick overview of the EU settlement scheme and where things are at the moment?
So, as you probably all know, the UK has left the European Union last year, basically to put it short, in order to be able to stay, if you were an EU national or their married partner, children, mother, father, or adopted children even, then you had to apply for either your indefinite leave to remain. So that's like indefinite permission to stay and work in the UK, or for your limited leave. So that would have been issued for 5 years.
So that's the settled versus pre-settled. Settled is the ILR equivalent and pre-settled is the limited.
There are more than, so the language is, there are more than one words for the same. But yeah.
So where's the scheme now? Is it? I know obviously it's ended. But what's the situation now with the applications at the Home Office? Are they still processing them, as I believe?
So yeah, there's a huge backlog.
Right.
If I am correct, that in June alone, so the scheme officially ended on the 30th of June 2021 for first applications. But I will put a star in here and get back to here because it's not completely true, as everything with the EU side of things, this is complex, but largely it has ended for first applications.
Yeah, and this backlog being
and
still
so in June alone, it was broadcasted that 300,000 people applied under the scheme. So the backlog is huge with the Home Office. I'm sure they are doing their best, but there can be huge delays. The website is still saying that the processing time is 5 working days.
Wow.
This is unfortunately far from being true. However, since there is no self-imposed deadline as to how long the Home Office can actually take by looking at these applications.
All right, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, right. So practically and in theory, they could take their time and last forever.
So I have a question for you. So a lot of people are obviously concerned about whether they can work, rent, open bank accounts, get mortgages, and all these important things that one needs to do when they're in the UK or settling in the UK. So obviously the applications are amongst the 300,000, and it's pending, isn't it? It's a pending application. I mean, maybe you could shed some light on how they can prove their status in the UK whilst the application is pending.
Sure.
Can they do something or get some paperwork to prove that?
Yes, so there can be done more than one things. If the application is still pending with the Home Office for settled or pre-settled status, if someone is an EU national, then they can log into their account basically with the Home Office. There is a link under, if you Google view and prove your rights, then the website will ask for your passport number or ID number that you applied with and your date of birth. You log in there, and from there you can generate a code with which you can, so you need to provide this either to your landlord or your employer or whomever is asking, school, whatsoever. And then the entity who is asking, they will know where to insert this into, and this will prove their status pending application. This is only open for EU nationals and only for those who've got their certificate of application already issued by the Home Office.
Okay, well, naturally, the question would be, what if I don't have a certificate application issued?
Family members.
Or the family members. This situation is the same. Basically, there is a service provided by the Home Office whereby landlords and employers or potential employers can check someone's immigration status pending application. Right. That's another two links. Basically, what the problem is with this route is that you can't force landlords and or potential employers, to actually check the immigration status. So unfortunately, these applicants may find themselves in the situation that they are left without recourse.
Right. But if an employer wanted to, they could go down that route. If someone has applied for for pre-settled or settled, what you're saying, hasn't received the certificate of approval yet, which comes in by email, I assume.
Yeah.
And so that would be the recourse for the landlord or for the potential employer. And if they have received the certificate of approval, then there is a link which the applicant can go into, generate a code, and that code gets provided to the person asking.
Yeah, certificate of application, which is an official email attachment sent to the applicant, to the email address that was used for the application. And normally it's the applicant. And then, you just click on it, enter your details, and then you can generate this code. And this is also important because once an application is approved for EU nationals, they will have to use the same link, the same account to keep their data up to date with the Home Office. They will still be under a legal obligation to update the site, their own account. Should their passport or ID change, or should they move, or even if their phone number or email address changes. Yeah,
great.
And
so
this
that's
is
after
also,
it's been approved as well.
Yes, and this is also important in terms of traveling because EU nationals will not have any biometric residence cards, whereas their family members who are not from the EU, they can. Yeah. So not all of them will automatically, but they do. Everyone has the option to apply for one if they are not from the EU.
Okay, well that explains it. Okay.
So just to summarize, if they go to that link, and we will provide that link in the description and in the blog post and show notes. So if they go to that link, it will then show employers or whoever needs the proof that it is currently pending. Is that the current situation?
Well, so if it's pending, then it will say that, yes, this person called this and that was born and on such and such date has the right to work and reside in the UK pending application. Once it's approved, it will say that, yes, this person has settled or pre-settled status.
Okay.
And if it's pre-settled, it will even probably say the date until which they have the status.
Okay, and family members then, if it's still pending, they wouldn't have been issued the card. How would they prove their right to work in the UK?
They cannot, but the employer or the landlord, I mean, the class of people who can check the statuses of not EU family members' immigration status pending application is restricted to landlords and employers and potential employers. Unfortunately, to other like schools, it's not open to. However, landlords and employers can go online, enter the application number, and then they will be issued with a certificate that will be valid for 6 months. And because probably you've heard of this before, specifically landlords and employers are under really severe legal obligations to check immigration statuses of everyone they employ or rent to. because if they don't, then per person they can get fined up to £20,000. And so the certificate that would be issued by the Home Office will be a legal defense should the Home Office come and check.
Sure.
The other question is, what about the people who missed the deadline, the June deadline to apply?
Yeah. So the good news, there is a good news. Actually, there are two pieces of good news in front of us. One of them is that the Home Office has released an update of their caseworker guidance of the settlement scheme. And now this has an added 10-15 pages. We will provide the link to the guidance as well. And these 10-15 pages set out the reasonable grounds when someone has missed the deadline, but still applies and is able to get the settled or pre-settled status as applicable because they had a reasonable ground to apply late. The other good news, I'll go into details in a second. The other good news is that actually the settlement scheme is not completely closed. It's still open for some first applications, and actually it is open for second applications. What I mean is by second applications that if someone has pre-settled status and they have been in the UK for 5 years and they haven't been outside of the UK for more than 180 days in the 5 years leading up to their second settlement application, they can and they should apply for their settled status. So what you're saying is
if I'm someone who initially got pre-settled, say, in 2019, and now I've completed my 5 years, I can then switch over to the settled status under the same scheme, even though the deadline has been passed.
So the deadline was for first applications, and this is going to be your second application because you've got pre-settled at first.
So you touched on late applications, which I've seen a lot, and people do. People are asking what. Then they come up with the what is a reasonable ground. I mean, I hear that there are some examples of what these reasonable grounds are, but I've never looked into it. Do you have some examples?
So I do have a few examples. I mean, it is 10-15 pages long, and the things covered are sort of if someone is vulnerable, such as homeless, or were around the deadline, so they didn't even need to be throughout the 2.5 years that the scheme was open for first applications. The reasonable ground had to have existed in the couple of months before the deadline to the deadline. Anyway, so there are, so for instance, homeless people are covered. What's very important, and I think many people are probably affected by this, are children. So if children have been cared for by authorities and the authority missed the deadline of the application, obviously children are not expected to make their applications on their own, even though under the relevant rules, children are defined as being under 21 years old.
Right. Okay. Well, that's important.
That's very important because it gives you 3 more years than you would expect.
Yes.
To fall under this category. And so children, even if their parents missed the deadline, they didn't know, they were not aware of the legal obligation of having to apply, they can still apply. And the fact that the child was under 21 before 30th of June, they can make a late application.
Okay, so that's a reasonable ground.
That is a reasonable ground, so just being a child, basically.
The parent would then not get status. It's too late for the parent, but their children would.
There are other reasonable grounds of that.
Yeah, the parent wouldn't be covered by this ground specifically, but he or she may have got another ground to argue.
Okay, so do you know of any other reasonable grounds that
so there are
and like an adult could apply?
Absolutely. So for instance, there are some practical and or compassionate grounds, such as living overseas. So if you're an adult living overseas thinking that, I have lived in the UK for X amount of years and I only left a couple of years back, I didn't know that I had to apply to maintain my UK immigration status. So they will be able to apply successfully. They do have a reasonable ground. Another one is if someone actually applied to the Home Office before or during the first time when the settlement scheme opened, but for different documents, not under the scheme, but under the previously existing EU law rules.
Right, like permanent residency.
Like permanent residency or
the residence permit
or the residence card.
Permit.
Family permit. If any of these would have been valid at the time of the late application, though, so it would still need to be valid at the time of the late application, again, that will be accepted as a reasonable.
Right.
So if I had PR, I could now go ahead and apply.
As long as it was still valid.
Well, if you, so you had to apply for a document certifying your permanent residence. Document. And the document, I can't recall it off the top of my head, whether or not these documents have an expiry date, because even though permanent residence meant that you can stay in the UK permanently and you no longer need to work or exercise your treaty rights by other means, but the document itself might have an expiry date.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
And then family members who are not from the EU, they might have a permanent or not permanent residence card. Those for sure have an expiry date. So that
but if any of them are valid now and I haven't taken advantage of the scheme, then
they can still apply.
It can still give me a reasonable reason to go ahead and apply for pre-settled.
They still have a reasonable ground to apply.
But it's important.
Application even for pre-settled status.
But it's important to do it now before the document expires.
I would say ASAP. Yeah, absolutely. And before the document expires.
So you mentioned family members. So that's for ones that have missed the deadline. But now what about family members of those who are on settled status, who now want to come join their family members in the EU? How does that work for them?
Some of them can. That's the good news. The bit of a bad news is that, so the category of these family members is called joining family members.
But
it's a very restricted category. So this is, I don't know if you can see it, this is the criteria, which is sixfold. So basically the EU national, if they have pre-settled, they need to be on course for settled status. Now this takes me to, how do you lose your pre-settled status? You can lose your pre-settled status if you get it, and then you stay outside of the UK for 2 years continuously or more. Then it's gone, it's lapsed by operation of law. It's like it never existed. And also the EU person, I mean, that's probably implied, but they had to be in the UK before 31st of December 2020.
Right. Yeah, before the Brexit day.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but okay. So if I haven't lost it, I am an EU national residing in the UK.
Yeah.
I have been here since last year. I've got my pre-settled status, and I haven't been anywhere because obviously a lot of people not traveling because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But say I've just been here since I've got it now, all of a sudden I want to get my family over to the UK from, let's say, South Africa, who would be considered third country nationals, I believe.
Yeah.
Could they come join me now?
Well, some of them might be able to. Some of them would have never even been able to, even if your whole family would have migrated to the UK earlier than last year. It's because only some of the family relationships were recognized by EU law, and then this recognition was adapted by the relevant rules.
So would my wife and my two children be joining family members now?
So they might be able to join you and get even pre-settled status under the scheme, provided that the marriage or the family relationship has existed before, again, 31st of December 2020.
Okay.
So if you've only married 2 months ago, then this is not going to work unless you live together for 2 years before 31st of January 2020.
Right, as cohabiting partners as such. Okay.
Yeah. And then children should be able to join you even if they were born after
the 31st of December 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can make a general statement that the scheme is actually taking care of children very much. So they are focusing on providing rights under this route for children.
So if I did marry my South African wife, say 10 years ago, I just happen to be the EU citizen who's got a pre-settled status now in the UK.
So are you still together?
Yes, very much so.
Okay, so this is another requirement that the family relationship has to be,
even though we're married,
subsisting at the time of application.
Okay, right. Okay, of course.
Yep. And also, your wife shouldn't have been in the UK before as your family member.
Sure.
Okay. If they were, and so there is an exception to that as well. Of course, it's really very complex. Basically, if they have been in the UK, but more than 5 years have passed ever since they were in the UK as your family member, then they can still come under the joining family member category, provided all other criteria are met.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Yeah. So the scheme is very much still open for joining family members.
Even for
it's just a set of criteria to meet, basically.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It seems like it's kind of designed around keeping together families who are genuine families, but you're going to have difficulty if your family is somehow different, like if you've been in a long distance relationship for most of your marriage or something like that. Because you're going to have difficulty then proving that you have a genuine family relationship.
That's correct. You will have a hard time. Albeit the new guidance is allowing evidence that wouldn't be accepted in relation to any other type of applications for visas.
Oh, interesting.
Such as statements from yourself to prove that you have been homeless.
Right. Yeah.
So your own statement normally doesn't count as evidence at all.
Yeah.
But
it's quite biased.
Yeah, but it could be used to prove that you have been homeless, therefore you didn't have the means to apply before and you're late.
And if I was to come in as a family member, would I get the same leave as the person? Coming back to my South African wife, would she get 5 years like I have? For example, under the pre-settled route.
First, she would need to apply for a family permit.
Okay, as a joint member.
If she doesn't have a family permit under the scheme, then she wouldn't be able to apply for pre-settled for the next step. Which will be the pre-settled.
So she gets a family permit and then should come in and then apply for the pre-settled status at that point. And so would my children as such.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they will get the settled status at the 5-year point, whenever that is the case.
That's correct.
So, Michelle, your UK wife's going to be a bit worried, all this talk about your South African wife bringing her over.
Yeah, I must put a disclaimer. This is a fictional situation.
Yes, his wife is in the next one, so it's fine.
So then just talking about all this bringing people into the UK, also we mentioned traveling. So do you have any tips for traveling in and out of the UK now with the settled or pre-settled status?
Well, yes. So as I mentioned it before, it is very, very important that all EU nationals keep the Home Office updated with regards to their passport numbers or ID numbers. Otherwise, they might run into some border officer, because the checks are automated. So if you applied and got the status or it is pending, you put your passport or ID into the e-gate at the border, and that should automatically bring up your immigration status.
Yep.
But if you, in the meantime, renewed your passport or ID, and you didn't take the effort to update your account, then the person at the border might say that, look, you don't have a immigration status in the UK, only because you might do, but he can't see.
Basically, I don't think you'll be able to use the e-gates. You'll be probably flagged up, and you'll probably have to go see a border official who can just clarify the situation.
And I think,
go through.
I don't know if
it just comes a delay rather than
it can have very, very serious consequences. I'm not sure if you have read it in the papers. Even before the official deadline of 30th of June, about 3,000 people were taken, EU nationals, were taken to immigration detention.
Right.
Because, let's forget about the settlement scheme for 1 second. What about those EU nationals who were not in the UK before the 31st of December, had no status and had no claim under the settlement scheme? Basically, and in theory, they should still be able to come to any of the ports of the UK and come in and be granted with an automated 6-month visit visa that wouldn't even be stamped in. It's just, it would be on the records of the Home Office. Sure. That's all.
Yes, yeah.
But if the border officer has the suspicion that, they will not
leave in 6 months.
I just don't see it fit. Why would they leave? They just told me that they have a spouse in the UK, or they are visiting their parents who are sick.
Yeah, so
they do have the discretion to say that I don't believe that you will leave the UK within the 6 months, and you have no other immigration status in the UK. Therefore, I will not allow you in. And the method of that is that first they would put them into detention center.
And then sort of send them back. But so I think the moral of the story is you got to get your paperwork right.
Yeah.
to make sure
EU nationals don't have to apply, for instance, for a visit visa, but I think they are better
off doing it. Yeah, best to get the paperwork for that.
Absolutely.
Are there any final deadlines that one needs to look out for? Because it's all for me, when I hear about Brexit and I hear about the settlement scheme, I always take deadline, and I know one's just passed. Are there any other deadlines worth considering for those people in the UK as such?
There are
family members joining them.
For joining family members, believe it or not, there is no deadline.
There's no deadline. Okay.
For family permits, however, so, for instance, what we haven't talked about, that there are some people who are called qualifying British citizens, and they can bring in the UK their joining family members. Yes, but these joining family members have to apply. They have to come in together with the qualifying British citizen until, if I remember correctly, 29th of March 2022.
2022. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Okay, so that's that's for qualifying British citizens rather than just your standard joining family member.
What makes a qualifying British citizen?
So basically, that is defined under the now expired EU law. The British citizen has to be still working or exercising their treaty rights in an EU country.
Right. So that's based on that surrender-saying principle that used to exist in terms of in the EU side of things, EU law side of things. So that's, I think what that means to Lua is for example, if I was a British citizen, but I'd always lived in France,
Yeah.
So if you've got a choice
Right.
to,
So you could come back to the UK and you could
then-
get your family could
correct.
join you. So long as they do it, but they come with you to the UK and they do it before that deadline.
Yeah.
But rather than join me under the UK immigration rules, they would be able to apply for permission to enter under the sort of settlement scheme or the new appendix to cover these guys. Which I know a lot of people can attest to is a lot more straightforward to me in terms of the regulations.
Cheaper, really.
And cheaper,
That's the main thing. Yeah.
So okay,
yeah,
interesting.
and I think this is also a gesture from the UK government to keep families together. It's basically a message to those British citizens who have been living and or working abroad that you are welcome home and you can even bring your family in without being charged for their visas.
Yeah, as soon as you're in an EU country and your sort of life has been based around there, then Okay, so that deadline is March 2022.
Well, for the first visa,
for the first visa.
And that would limit because actually another requirement of being a joining family member that you have to have a family permit, even if you are an EU national.
Yes, you mentioned,
So you can apply for a family permit even if you are an EU national, and you have to make your application under the settlement scheme for pre-settled status within 3 months of arriving in the UK.
Gotcha.
Very, very important. If you have a visa inserted into your passport, get it stamped on the border.
Yeah, don't use the e-gates.
Don't use the e-gates, even if you could. Don't. Make sure that you go to the border officer.
Just to show that you come in on this date so they can do your 3 months.
That will make your life easier down the line.
Right,
That's a really good tip.
Good.
Are there any other deadlines that you wanted to mention?
Well, so if someone is on a pre-settled status, so for instance, you arrived in 2019, then you duly applied for your pre-settled status, that would have been issued for 5 years. So say sometime until 2024, you must apply for your settled status, provided that you meet the residence criteria before your pre-settled status expires. Sure. So that is also a very tight deadline.
So more like visa deadlines and the qualifying British citizen deadline that you mentioned seems to be. But I think the point is that joining family members don't have a deadline yet, which is quite important and crucial for listeners to know that.
Yeah.
But of course,
but then if you think about it, who would have a married spouse
and not live with them?
And how would you prove your relationship was ongoing if you weren't living together for many years?
If you're not in the same place.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's been quite a good bit of information, guys.
Yeah. There is one more tip. So if you have pre-settled status, but you've only married your spouse who is from the EU or from any other parts of the world, but not the UK, they can actually apply for a spouse visa, not under the EU settlement scheme, but under
the
normal spouse visa, even the fiancé visa.
Which is useful. Because that would then apply if you weren't married before the end of Brexit. That would be the best way to get someone.
Pre-settled status, not settled status. Even then, you can bring your new spouse.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. It will cost, especially getting to the indefinite leave stage. Up to £10,000 as things stand, the 3 applications at least.
I think a lot of questions for our listeners have been answered here.
You want to talk a little bit about the services that we offer and what part of this we can help with?
Any, basically.
So if you have any questions, get in touch with us.
Basically, yes. We can assess, it's not only me, there are other caseworkers as well. So we can assess whether your family members could still join you as joining family members. You better get it checked because it's complex. We could assess whether
for late applications as well.
For late applications, We could even represent you for late applications as long as the circumstances are reasonably straightforward and meet the criteria set out by the guidance, for which we will provide the link. The guidance itself is 225 pages.
So we read it so you don't have to.
And most of it is in legalese. So probably, you might want to call us. We can represent first applications, second applications, and nationality applications.
Yep.
And again, the need might arise for an assessment first, because especially for EU nationals and their family members, the criteria for naturalization is rather complex. I wouldn't even want to go into that now.
But so just to summarize, so pre-settled, settled status in terms of late applications, joining family members,
qualifying British citizens,
and their family members. But more or less, just get on the phone to us and let's just have a chat.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been fascinating. I learned a lot. Yeah, and we will we'll chat again soon.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.